Hello, and welcome to part 2 of my Mortal Kombat retrospective. As always, I am your host, The Laughing Man. Last time we left off with the end of the classic era of Mortal Kombat in 1997. I mentioned Mortal Kombat 4 in the movie Annihilation, but I left out a few side entries to the series. Mortal Kombat Mythologies Sub-Zero and Mortal Kombat Special Forces. Mortal Kombat Mythologies is significant in that it was the last Mortal Kombat game to feature the digitized sprites, whereas the main series, starting with Mortal Kombat 4, went with 3D avatars and never looked back. It was also the first time we saw Quan Chi and Shinnok in a Mortal Kombat game. Mortal Kombat Special Forces focused on Jackson Jax Briggs. Like Mythologies, Special Forces was a platformer, and that's really all there is to say about it. Now, I played neither of these games as Mortal Kombat had largely fallen off my radar by that point, as I imagine happened with a lot of other players as well. They were both good ideas on paper, expanding the Mortal Kombat universe, no harm in that, right? Fortunately, Midway would correct that with 2005's Shaolin Monks, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, like I said in the Classic Combat video, my interest in Mortal Kombat had begun to taper off a little bit in 1997. The shitty movie sequel, the unimpressive foray into 3D fighting, the abysmal platformers. Needless to say, Mortal Kombat would not pique my interest again until 2002 with the release of Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. What initially got me hooked on this game was the song Immortal by the band Adema. This quickly became one of my favorite songs of my high school years, and by embracing a style of music that was popular at the time, Mortal Kombat re-emerged into the forefront of gamers' minds. But the song wasn't the only thing that breathed new life into the franchise. Deadly Alliance introduced different fighting styles, approximately 3 per character. You had 2 main fighting styles, as well as one style featuring a weapon. Combined with the ability to properly move in 3-dimensional space, Mortal Kombat finally felt like it had caught up with the fighting games of its day, and it held its own. Plus, they kill Liu Kang!
Liu Kang is dead.
You heard that right. One of the series' most recognizable characters, even featuring as the main protagonist of the first film, is killed off in the opening cutscene. We're in new fucking territory. Deadly Alliance was the last Mortal Kombat game I played when it was new, so unfortunately from here on out I'll be making observations after the fact, but I can say that I've played every main game in the series. 2 sequels to Deadly Alliance were made over the next 4 years, called Deception, released in 2004, and Armageddon, released in 2006. Deception I never really got into, as I was still playing Deadly Alliance at the time. The only thing I really remember about it, other than the corpse of Liu Kang, was its brief appearance in the movie 40-Year-Old Virgin in the You Know How I Know You're Gay scene. And, wait, are they playing with N64 controllers? Was that supposed to be a joke? It wasn't even released for the N64! Armageddon, though I played it when the game was already a year or 2 old, hooked me with the fact that it brought back every character in the Mortal Kombat series. Some I hadn't seen in a game for over a decade. That and the title itself, Armageddon. Was it the last Mortal Kombat? Series co-creator Ed Boon didn't help matters during an interview with IGN in which he said, "Armageddon does imply the end in a few ways. It is the end of MK on this generation of consoles. It also is the final battle between all the good and evil characters in the MK universe. We really want to close this chapter of Mortal Kombat." So what did that mean? Well, we would find out in 2011's Mortal Kombat. Wait, Mortal Kombat? Didn't they already make this game? Well, yes and no. This is what I like to call the dreaded reboot, in which a studio or property holder has generally run the franchise into a dead end, and they have no recourse but to reboot the series with a fresher, more contemporary take on the source material. Now, this can either work, such as with Batman Begins, X-Men First Class, and 2009's Friday the 13th, or it doesn't. Now, how they pulled off the reboot here was pretty clever, in that they tied the idea of the reboot into the story itself. At the end of Armageddon, the only fighters left are Raiden and Shao Kahn.
He must win.
Raiden, at the brink of defeat, sends a vision of this possible future to his younger self at the beginning of the 10th Mortal Kombat. or the first game, to avoid the apocalyptic future that the original narrative led to.
Strange visions.
Now, is it kind of contrived, kind of cheap that the original storyline that we all grew up on has sort of been cast aside in order to allow the new storyline to flourish? Sure, that's a valid argument. I know of some people, for instance, who refuse to read new Star Wars books because all of the old stuff had been decanonized and turned into Star Wars legends. The difference here is that, like Terminator Genisys, it presents the original story in a new way with some surprising twists. Unlike Genisys, however, it's not a simple retread of old themes and ideas. If you think about it, it's actually continuing the story, but in the past. Whatever, just play the game, it's good. If nothing else but for the then new X-ray mechanic. I remember that thing being one of those water cooler moments where it was just the one thing that everybody talked about at the time. So it was around this time that I remember hearing about Mortal Kombat Rebirth, a short film that had debuted online in 2010. Let me preface this first by taking you back again to 1997. Mortal Kombat Annihilation had come out, and since most of us were kids back then, we were all looking forward to the third movie. Well, needless to say, we never got it, and Annihilation was, in part, the reason for that. Along with some lackluster entries into the game series at the time, which I've already covered, Mortal Kombat fell out of the public eye until, again, 2002-2003. The fallout from Annihilation had tapered off by that point, and interest in the franchise started cropping up again, along with talks of a third movie. Now, for some reason in the 2000s, we were all about realism in the media we consumed. That largely still features today, but back then we were hungry for it. When Batman Begins came along, it seemed to be everything we never knew we wanted in a Batman movie. Gone were the goofy origin stories and zany antics of their counterparts in earlier movies and comics. In were stories and motivations grounded in reality. The scalloped fins, for example, on Batman's gloves now served a purpose. No longer was Joker a victim of acid bath scarring, but it was implied he was abused by his father. All of this is to say that we wanted a Mortal Kombat movie with that same sort of gritty feel, and we got that mostly with Rebirth. In spite of it being an 8-minute short film versus the movie that we wanted, when I first saw the thing, it was like I was being introduced to Mortal Kombat for the first time. It struck a chord in me, as I imagine it did to most people that saw it, because it eschewed that mysticism of the characters and presented them in a new light. No longer was Baraka a nomadic mutant in the service of Shao Kahn. Now he was a plastic surgeon who went crazy and carved his teeth into fangs and gave himself surgical implants in the form of blades in his forearms. Likewise, with Reptile, instead of being a minion of Shao Kahn and obsessed with freeing his homeworld of Zatara from the rule of Outworld, he is instead a victim of the disease Harlequin-type ichthyosis, which gives him his scales, and he stores the heads of his victims in a freezer until he eats them.
Fatalities are in the double digits. Code name, Reptile.
Pretty gruesome stuff, but it was awesome. Apparently the director, Kevin Tanchorin, used Rebirth as a pitch to sell Warner Brothers, which had acquired the rights to Mortal Kombat when Midway folded in 2009, on the idea of a third movie. While that didn't work out, what we got instead were 2 seasons of Mortal Kombat Legacy in 2011. The first season was more in line with the feel of Rebirth, in that it downplayed the mystical aspects. That all changed with the second season. Here, they fully embraced the storytelling of the games. That's not to say that I think the video games have a bad story. I was just disappointed that they had strayed so far from what Rebirth had established. But whatever, at least we got to see Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa reprise his iconic role as Shang Tsung from the first movie. Next up is Mortal Kombat X. X for it being the 10th game in the franchise. I thought it was interesting that they added 10 to the end of the title since we're in a new continuity. Shouldn't that be 2? 2011's Mortal Kombat didn't have an IX in the title, so why change it? Anyway, this one of course picks up where the last one left off, so I won't get into too much detail into the story, since it's still relatively new. But it is interesting to note just how many new characters there are. Well, new in quotation marks, since most of them just seem to be the kids of the classic characters. Johnny Cage and Sonya finally got together and had Cassie, who honestly is probably my favorite of the new characters. Jax has a kid named Jackie, and Kenshi begat Takada. For better or worse, these are the characters that NetherRealm Studios seems to be passing the torch off onto to carry the series forward into the future. Another thing I want to note here, is it just me or has the Fatality lost its charm in the past 25 years with how realistic graphics have gotten? I didn't notice this until I unlocked the classic skins for the fighters in Mortal Kombat X. Here, you see Sub-Zero execute his classic spinal cord rip on Scorpion. Ugh, good lord.
Sub-Zero wins.
Do you see how realistic the spinal cord is portrayed and the color of the blood? Gone are the bright reds of the past. This looks like real blood. In the original game, and obviously this was strictly due to hardware constraints at the time, the same fatality was less detailed with cartoony blood animations, more so concerned with the fact that you just ripped out somebody's fucking spinal column. You didn't need to see the viscera to know how bad that shit was. Every time I do a fatality in this game, I feel like I'm watching a snuff film. Jesus.
Scorpion.
Good lord.
Fatality.
I don't think they'll have this at home, no.
You don't think so?
A little bit
you
too
look
violent.
a little startled.
Yeah, it's a little too violent, I think.
Oh great, now I'm that guy. So, that about sums up my modern Mortal Kombat retrospective, and my recollections on the Mortal Kombat series as a whole. And looking back, I've been trying to think what it is about Mortal Kombat that keeps me coming back to it. As I've stated previously, I'm no fighting game aficionado. The amount of fighting games I've played outside of MK, I can probably count on one hand. But why is that? Why am I a fan of one fighting game series while all the others barely hold my attention? And asking myself these questions, I realized it's the characters. They're all cool to look at, and they all have interesting stories that could be their own separate games. Well, you know what I mean. Think of the conflict between Scorpion and Sub-Zero. They're each a member of rival ninja clans, Scorpion being of the Shirai Ryu, and Sub-Zero of the Lin Kuei. Being that they are rivals, Sub-Zero kills Scorpion, but is surprised 2 years later when he sees Scorpion at the 10th Mortal Kombat tournament, who has returned as an undead spawn of hell looking for revenge. Johnny Cage is an action star whose career is in decline and sees the Mortal Kombat tournament as a way to prove himself to his haters. Sonya Blade, a Special Forces agent, was in pursuit of a criminal known as Kano when he boarded a ship that was bound for Shang Tsung's island and therefore the tournament. I could go on, but I think you get the picture. They all had their own reasons for wanting to participate in the tournament, which made them more compelling as characters. As a kid, I was caught up in the unfolding drama of Mortal Kombat with each new game release, and I think that, in spite of the problems with gameplay and the crackdowns on violence in the 90s, it was the story and characters that continue to make Mortal Kombat stand the test of time. In closing, I'll just let Mr. Ed Boon sum up my final point. Thanks for watching, guys. This has been fun.
What's kind of special about Mortal Kombat is our characters are so completely different, from contemporary things like a movie star to a Shaolin monk to a thunder god to the military people. You know, they have nothing to do with each other, but if you give them all the motivation to want to fight in this tournament with their own goals and agendas in terms of winning it, then all of a sudden you have this great story with all these kind of diverse characters with a similar goal, and it kind of glues it all together.